Well, deer season's getting close. It's time to start doing that pre-season scouting where we're looking for fresh deer sign. So I'm going to share with you a couple tips today on hunting agriculture like these beans behind me. I'm going to show you two different setups, one of which is pretty tough, this setup right here I'm about to show you, and the other of which I think is the perfect setup where you can put yourself right on top of the deer and have a good chance at a shot. First, let's look at this spot real quick and what the potential setups are if this is all you got to work with. See behind me, I got the beans. They're not very tall. They're not much taller than knee high in a lot of places. They were planted late, that's a good thing. So we got that going for us here. We got green beans that are going to stay green into bow season. I've walked the edge of this field a good ways and found where the sign is mostly concentrated right here. And I can see trails going through these tall weeds in front of me, coming out of and going into this thicket here. So they may be going up and down the field edge, but they're coming in and out here quite a bit. So I know I found the spot where I want to be to put myself in bow range. But then here comes the tough part. Look what they're coming in and out of. I can't see a place to put a tree stand here. There may be a spot farther back in the woods, but this is the type of thicket where they may only be bedded a short distance off of the field edge, and you really don't want to go too far into this thicket. So if you're going to be setting up, you're going to want to be setting up right here on the edge, and that's going to be tough. So I would consider two options for setting up here. One, if you really want to be elevated, put your scent a little higher up and have a better shot at a deer without getting busted. There's really no trees within bow range of this little opening here where you could hang a tree stand, but if you have a tripod stand, if that's an option for you, I would tuck a tripod stand up into one of these bushes or smaller shrub trees, tuck it in as good as possible, make sure you got a backdrop where you're not kind of skylined, and that could be a great setup. If that's not an option for you and you want to sit on the ground, you could do a ground blind. You can see you just tuck it up into the bushes here. It'd be ideal to put it out ahead of time, like right now. Season opens in like 3 weeks, and get the deer accustomed to it. Ground hunting is going to be tougher because the wind has to be perfect, because if it blows towards them, it goes straight from you to them. It doesn't have a chance to blow over their head. So keep that in mind. When I bow hunt on the ground, I don't really use a blind usually, just a preference really. If you don't want to use a blind, there's actually pretty good cover here. The main issue again is going to be the wind. You want the wind coming out of the thicket. You don't want it to go in there at all. You don't want the deer to smell you before they enter the field. I'd like to at least be coming into the field at an angle. And you can see briars over behind me. You could even tuck yourself up into those briars to sit on a pad on the ground. I wouldn't even use a chair. You're sitting up too high. But just make sure you push the weeds down enough to where your bow and arrow has room to draw back and shoot. But then leave the rest of the weeds tall all around behind you. You want to be tucked in there and be able to shoot just over top of the weeds if necessary. So I would sit in these shorter weeds with the briars behind me. It gives me a good backdrop, and be very, very still, very quiet. And you want the wind coming out into the bean field. The idea is to shoot them before they cross your scent. I know I've got a better spot where I went out the other evening and saw 9 deer in this one field. The same deal, it was late planted soybeans, but there's a creek going around the back of it, and I know there's hardwoods with climbable trees on the other side. So what I'm going to do now is take you over there, and we're going to go look for the perfect tree to set up, put myself right on top of the deer for an evening hunt. So let's go check that out. Alright, so I'm at the back of the field where I saw a bunch of deer the other day, and what I'd completely forgotten was there's another field behind it. So what I thought was the tree line on the creek bank is actually just a big overgrown fence row that's right behind me, and it's very possible deer were just bedded down in there and came out into the field. But either way, I walked this little field back here that's actually down along the creek and did not see very promising deer sign, just a little bit here and there. I even jumped a deer. I'm going to go on into the next bean field, which goes down along the actual creek, and I'm going to find us a good creek crossing spot to climb a tree and set up. We got one fawn. kind of odd that those two fawns were by themselves in the field. Makes me think something happened to the mama. But regardless, I did notice there's tons of browse here. In fact, if you look down, you can't even see much beans, and it's not because they didn't grow, it's because they're being eaten down like crazy right here. And honestly, down the length of the field and out in the middle there's browse too, but right here looks the heaviest. So I've made it back here to the creek mouth, and I found this little trail coming down. We're coming up whichever way you look at it, and it looks like a great little highway for the deer to come up the bank, but it's a little bit slick, doesn't have many deer tracks, and there's fresh chewed branches down there, green branches off of these bushes. That tells me that's a beaver slide, and not to say the deer don't use it, but it's not a primary deer highway. It's not primarily used by deer. It's a beaver slide, so that's something to keep in mind. It's not the best spot. These banks are real tall up through here, so I've come across the same problem here where I've got a little thicket here. There's a little more than usual between the field and the creek, and it's enough cover that deer could just lay up in here and make their way out to the field in the evening and not ever cross the creek. But I'm not going to give up yet. I'm going to move down the bank a little ways. If I don't find a crossing, we're gonna go check some other spots out. Well, the creek crossing didn't pan out the way I'd hoped. It was just not the right setup I had in mind. I figured it would be a lot less space between the fields and the creek. Instead, it was a lot of thicket and deer trails going through some thicket and whatnot. But basically, there was no place to put up a climbing stand, so I'm gonna have to try another setup there, like hunting off the ground, or even ladder stand or a portable lock-on or something like that would work in that case. But it was not the ideal climber scenario I had in mind. I could think of another spot or two I could go and try to find a good setup like that, but the sun's getting low, and I've grabbed my 22 here to keep an eye out for squirrels as I head into these bean fields that I checked a few weeks ago when I got this camera. Did some test footage out there, saw a couple decent bucks, so I'm gonna go out there now and see if those bucks or any other deer show up this evening. Maybe we'll get an idea. Alright, so I found potentially a spot to climb. What I got behind me is a bean field I come through on the way down here, and then there's a larger bean field out in front of me, and it wraps around, and I'm in like basically a finger of woods that comes out to a point in that big bean field. And I bumped a doe there just a minute ago, and then a few weeks ago when I was here, there was like 2 deer over there in the same point. So I don't know where they're coming out at, but I know they like that point. So I thought maybe I could find a climbing tree inside the woods, because there's nothing around the outside edge that I could ever get a climbing stand on, or almost any tree stand for that matter. But when I come up in here, it's pretty thick at first, but we got some mature cedar trees, and it's open enough in here I could almost get a shot out to 20 yards. I could definitely sneak a shot or two through here. And this tree right here looks like it might be the tree. It's kind of skinny, goes up about 15 to 20 feet. If I go much higher, I get into the canopy, so I'd want to be sitting like right up under the canopy. And I actually could maybe shoot a deer in here if they come through here to hit either field. And that's the other thing, is they could come through here and hit that field or the big field, and I would be in a good spot either way, as long as they filter right through here. Look, just looking through here, there's multiple trees that I could climb. This is definitely worth trying out for an evening spot sometime, and I will keep this in mind. I'm not going to say I'll hunt it, because I got a lot of spots in mind for this early bow season, and I've only got so much time to hunt. But this is definitely one of those spots that's worth coming back to. So we'll keep that in mind.